A vacation is the perfect way to get away from the stresses of everyday life and to see a part of the world you've never experienced before. But being away from everything you know can make things even harder when things go wrong. These are 5 people who disappeared while on vacation. Number 5. Charles Horvath Allen was on a gap year pilgrimage across Canada to explore the country where he was born and visit his father when he disappeared without a trace in 1989. Since then, Charles's mother, Denise, has spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to find her son with no success. Charles had been performing odd jobs to pay his way as he traveled across Canada, always making sure to check in with his mother. In May, not long after arriving, he called to tell her about his latest job, working at a nearby Flintstone Adventure Park, and asked about his family back in the UK. They discussed a trip to Hong Kong for his 21st birthday in a few months' time, and agreed to make arrangements at a later date. The next and last time Denise would get a message from her son came a few days later when he faxed the prices for flights from Vancouver to Hong Kong. He obviously intended to meet his mother there, but never had a chance to make future arrangements. Denise made several attempts to report her son missing, and finally, in August, the local police began a search. Foul play was suspected, but a number of problems hit the investigation. Police told Denise that they were searching for Charles in 6 locations, but it later emerged they hadn't even completed searching in one of them. It was also discovered the campsite Charles had been staying at had thrown away most of his belongings, including his ID, after his tent was abandoned, which meant it wasn't clear what Charles had taken with him before he disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of Charles was on May 26th when he went to cash out a check for some work. Another person had allegedly saw him in a nightclub in August after he'd officially been reported missing, but this has been unconfirmed and likely not true. Denise later received an anonymous tip about her son's location. She was told he'd been murdered at a party and thrown into a nearby lake. Police divers searched the lake but found no trace of Charles. To this day, what happened to Charles remains a mystery. Number 4. The Sandbaggers was a British TV show about espionage and intelligence agencies during the Cold War. Originally aired between 1978 and 1980, it's widely believed to be the most accurate portrayal of spies in the media. That's most likely because writer Ian McIntosh had at the very least connections to the British intelligence service. McIntosh was a former British naval officer. He had a relatively uneventful career and on the surface did nothing out of the ordinary that would have warranted the MBE he received. However, there was a secretive side to his work. He often wasn't at the base he was supposed to be at, what his wife called. He enjoyed the finer things in life, such as the best restaurants and the fastest cars, and most mysteriously, he always had to clear trips abroad with the authorities, even after he left the Navy. McIntosh left the Navy in 1976 so he could focus on his writing career. He wrote a number of novels and TV shows, though he was by far best known for The Sandbaggers. McIntosh wrote 2 full episodes about protagonist Neil B. Burnside, and was most of the way through the final series when he disappeared while on vacation with his girlfriend and a friend. In 1979, the trio set off for a trip to Alaska. The pilot, a former Fleet Air Arm pilot named Graham Barber, had performed a flight familiarization beforehand and even practiced landing the plane at sea without power. It was windy, with 40-foot seas, and they set off in a single-engine aircraft, but it shouldn't have been a problem for Barber. At around 5:45 p.m. on the 7th of July 1979, Barber sent out a distress signal. They were flying north-northeast of Kodiak Island, in the opposite direction of what McIntosh had planned, and towards an area of sea not covered by the Soviet or US radar. The US Coast Guard immediately sent out a plane to investigate. It reached McIntosh's last known location just a half hour later. There were no signs of any aircraft, wreckage, or survivors. A 3-day search took place, with multiple helicopters and boats searching for any trace of the writer or his companions. According to the air traffic controller who'd received Barber's distress signals, FAA officials told his boss there was no point in searching for them any longer. They were all in Russia by now. Many suspected McIntosh for some reason defected the Soviet Union. There were multiple suspicious occurrences before and after, and it was clear the US government believed McIntosh defected. He left behind his 2 children, but McIntosh's own brother admitted that he would have made the sacrifice of never seeing them again if he thought it was necessary. So far, no signs of McIntosh or his companions have ever been found. Number 3. In April of 1994, Karen Dennis Wells dropped her baby son off with her parents, then headed to visit a friend in Meade, New Jersey. About 3 hours before she could have reached her destination, Karen pulled into a motel in Cumberland County. She decided to make the rest of the journey the following day and called her friend, a nightclub dancer named Melissa Shepard, to let her know where she was. It was around 7 p.m., and Karen said that she would head to a local McDonald's for dinner before heading to bed. However, for some reason, Melissa opted to meet Karen at the motel in a few hours' time. At around midnight, Melissa arrived but received no answer from Karen. Her car was also missing from outside, and Melissa asked an employee to check on her. They found her room empty. Her belongings, including her clothes and her room key, were still in the room, but it was clear Karen hadn't slept in the bed. Police found Karen's rented car the same morning. It had been abandoned 35 miles from the motel with scratches on the side, no gas, and a dead battery. The underside of the car was splattered with mud. Further investigations only led to more questions. Police discovered 700 miles on the car odometer that couldn't be accounted for, and later emerged Karen had traveled to Berks County before turning back and returning to Cumberland County and the motel. It's never been determined why Karen turned back, but some believe it may have had something to do with the mysterious phone call Melissa received from the Berks area hours before Karen arrived there. No signs of Karen have ever been found, though the wife of Karen's ex-boyfriend claimed to have received a phone call from her around Thanksgiving. She'd supposedly gotten married and said she wouldn't be coming home. The story remains unconfirmed, and police believe Karen didn't make the call. Number 2. Frank and Letta Court had a rocky patch in their marriage. Both had had affairs, but now they were trying to rebuild their relationship. Perhaps part of that, they'd built a vacation home in the Caribbean. It was just after they'd finished the build that Letta disappeared. The couple had been drinking with friends on the evening of January 11, 2008, and after a brief nap on the backseat of her car, Letta was keen to continue enjoying the island. It wasn't only the weather and picture-perfect beaches that attracted Letta to St. Martin in the Netherlands. She liked to gamble, and the island was known for its casinos. It was here at around 11 p.m. that Letta wanted to go. She went into the house where Frank was asleep. She woke him to ask for money and the car keys, but Frank judged that she was too drunk to drive and refused. He tried to persuade her to stay home, but instead she opted to walk. It was just a 15-minute walk, something she'd done numerous times before. About 15 minutes after she left, Frank changed his mind, worried that she may get herself into trouble walking alone at night. He drove down the streets that she would have likely taken, but when he couldn't spot her, he assumed that she made it to the casino and returned home. When she hadn't come home the following day, Frank contacted authorities. A search party immediately got underway, as authorities were keen to close the case and avoid the negative impact on their tourism industry, as had been seen when Natalee Holloway disappeared in 2005, but no trace of her could ever be found. Surveillance footage from the casino showed she never made it to her destination. This was corroborated by casino staff who knew Letta as a regular customer. However, Frank alleged some local newspapers reported people had seen Letta at the casino. The last confirmed sighting of Letta by someone other than Frank or his mother was a neighbor who spotted her asleep in the car at 9:30 p.m. Suspicion fell on Frank. Though they'd been trying to rebuild their relationship, it wasn't going very well. Letta had called friends the day before her disappearance, talking about divorce. Frank had accused her of having another affair, and she suspected Frank had been visiting brothels on the island. Frank had been arrested a number of times since Letta vanished, but has never been charged for the disappearance. Number 1. Boris Weisfeller was on a solo hiking trip in Chile when he disappeared in 1985. A swift investigation by the Chilean authorities concluded he'd drowned, but his body was never found, and neither his family nor the US believed the story. Weisfeller was a naturalized US citizen, having immigrated from the Soviet Union in 1975. He taught at Penn State University, but in December of 1984, he wrote to his sister Olga that he was traveling south to get away from the snow. He wasn't unfamiliar with such hikes, and Weisfeller had taken solo hiking trips in remote parts of Siberia, Alaska, and even Peru. But this was the first time he traveled to Chile, which was controlled by a military dictatorship. When Weisfeller hadn't called after 2 weeks, Olga began to worry. His backpack was soon found near a river, and 2 Chilean investigations concluded that he'd drowned, but Olga argued her brother would never have attempted to cross the river at such a dangerous location. She continued to push the US to properly investigate her brother's disappearance, but she was told that they had no new information. In the year 2000, she discovered Boris's adopted country knew more than they were letting on. It emerged a military informant had contacted the US Embassy in Chile in 1987, 2.5 years after Weisfeller's disappearance. He claimed to have been part of a parole that arrested Weisfeller on January 4, 1985. Weisfeller was then taken to Colonia Dignidad. This was a secluded territory in Chile, established by a former Nazi soldier. While it looked peaceful from the outside, stories of child abuse, segregation, and torture surrounded the area. Weisfeller, who was Jewish, was accused of being a Russian and Jewish spy and was held there for at least 2.5 years. The investigation reopened in 2000, and in 2012, 8 former military officers were indicted for the kidnapping. However, the judge abruptly closed the investigation 3 years later, and all of the accused were acquitted. Olga and her family have continued to search for answers. Boris's body has never been found, and they hope he could somehow still be alive. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads.